The impact was so violent, it launched the aluminum boat 1.5 feet out of the water. I was tossed like a rag doll, my ribs slamming against the gunnel with a sickening crack. My vision flashed white. The air was violently shoved from my lungs. Before I could even scramble to my feet, a massive dark shadow loomed, breaking the surface right next to the hull. The wake sent the boat rocking wildly. Two jaundiced, cold, prehistoric eyes locked onto me. It was the Bayou King, a monstrous 20-foot gator, the ultimate terror of this entire Louisiana region. The distance between my face and jaws that could crush a car was less than an arm's length. It didn't lunge, it just drifted there, silently sizing me up. The outboard motor had died 2 hours ago. I had no gun, no radio signal, absolutely nowhere to run. Folks around here know me as Jake, a dedicated wildlife conservationist, a man who's devoted half his life to protecting creatures exactly like this one. But tonight, backed into a corner, facing inevitable death, a bitter truth hit me. This monster wasn't hunting at random. It had come to collect a debt. And it was a blood debt from 15 years ago, back when this so-called conservationist named Jake was actually the most ruthless and notorious poacher in the bayou. The heavy splash of its tail pulled me back to the present, but my mind was already slipping down into the darkness of 15 years ago. Back then, I didn't carry binoculars or an ecological logbook. I carried a modified rifle, homemade explosives, and dozens of rusty bear traps. I was a 20-year-old punk, aggressive, reckless, carrying a blind hatred for the wetlands that had claimed my father's life. To me, this bayou was just a filthy cash register, and the creatures living in it were nothing more than pelts to be skinned and sold. I didn't see life, I only saw dollar signs. One cold, fog-choked morning, I was wading through shoulder-high reeds to check my lines. The incessant buzzing of mosquitoes mixed with the overwhelming stench of rotting mud. And then I heard it. Not the ferocious death roll growl of a full-grown gator caught in a trap, but a weak, piercing hiss, carrying an absolute sense of despair. I parted the reeds and stepped forward. Pinned into the black mud by my largest steel trap was a baby gator. It was barely the length of my forearm, its scales still soft and unhardened. The rusty metal jaws had crushed half of its tail, blood seeping out to dye a small puddle of mud red. The tiny creature thrashed frantically, trying to bite at the unfeeling iron, its pitch-black eyes overflowing with agony and sheer panic. It had been there all night. I stood looking down at it, my face stone cold. A trap like this was supposed to snag the mother, not this worthless runt. Its skin wasn't even worth the price of a cigarette. Frustration boiling over, I raised the barrel of my rifle, intending to finish it off and save myself the trouble of peeling a rotting carcass out of the trap later. My finger rested on the trigger. I held my breath. Right at that moment, the baby gator stopped thrashing. It turned its head, its eyes wide, looking straight down the black barrel of my gun. It stopped hissing. It only let out a faint, feeble squeak, like a crying child. That look, the look of a living thing entirely helpless in the face of impending death. It pierced right through my thick coat, right through the callous, unfeeling shell I'd worn for years. Suddenly, I didn't see a worthless payout anymore. I saw my own cruelty reflected in those pitch-black eyes. I saw a bastard about to snuff out a life that had barely just begun. My hands shook, the rifle lowered. "You're real lucky, you little punk," I muttered, gritting my teeth to hide my own confusion. I tossed the rifle into the mud, stepped up, and knelt beside the trap. The creature started thrashing wildly again as I got close. "Hold still! Hold still!" I barked, trying to grip its slippery body. "I'm trying to help you, you stubborn little shit!" I used every ounce of strength I had, straining to press down on the lever of the rusted iron jaws. It was jammed. The metal shrieked a deafening screech. Sweat poured off me like I was in a sauna, despite the biting cold of the foggy morning. It took 15 minutes of wrestling to pry the iron jaws open just a fraction, but the barbed steel cable wrapped around it still had its mangled tail held tight. I had no other choice. I pulled my razor-sharp hunting knife from my belt. "This is gonna hurt," I gritted my teeth. I slipped the blade between the cable and the scales, trying to cut the wire, but the creature jerked violently in pain. In a split-second slip of the hand, my razor-sharp blade sliced through, not just cutting the cable, but carving a deep, clean gash into the undamaged flesh of its tail. The baby gator let out a blood-curdling screech, ripping its bloody tail out of the sprung trap. It slithered frantically into the thick mud, disappearing into the murky, gray water. I slumped back into the mud, panting. My right hand was bleeding where the steel cable had cut me. I looked at my blood-stained blade. That slip of the hand, I knew, had left a unique scar. A deep, V-shaped gouge that would never fade from that wretched creature's tail. "Kindness is what's going to get you killed out here, Jake," I told myself, a bitter taste rising in my throat. But I couldn't deny the truth. Looking at the still water where the tiny creature had just escaped, something inside me, a cold block of hatred, had begun to crack. That was day one of my redemption, the day I realized I couldn't be the bayou's executioner anymore. A violent splash severed the flashback. The bayou water churned. The aluminum boat rocked and swayed violently. The Bayou King didn't attack immediately. It swam a wide circle around my dead boat, slow, calculated. The full moon shone brightly on the water, and as it swung its massive tail, as thick as a centuries-old tree trunk, to change direction, its scales caught the light. My heart stopped. The blood in my veins turned to ice. It couldn't be. There, on that massive tail crisscrossed with scars from years of survival, one mark stood out, a deep, bone-white scar. A V-shaped scar, utterly unique. This wasn't just any gator. This was the runt in the steel trap from 15 years ago. The creature I assumed had died of an infected wound. Now, it had become the 20-foot terror of the Delta. The blood debt was due, but not in a human court, in the unforgiving court of nature. And the primal, ruthless judge was glaring at me with bottomless amber eyes. The Bayou King's hot breath hit my face, carrying the stench of the swamp and rotting meals of the past. So close, I could almost count the jagged, razor-sharp teeth exposed as it opened its jaws, letting out a low, guttural growl that vibrated across the water. It was done circling. The cat-and-mouse game was over. The judge of the swamp had passed his sentence, and the former poacher was backed into a corner with zero way out. Primal survival instincts screamed in my brain. Jump in the water, swim, do something. But the cold logic of a man who knows these animals pinned me to the cold aluminum floor. Beneath that black water, the king was an invisible guillotine with lightning speed. Jumping in meant voluntarily offering myself to those massive jaws. In my sheer panic, my memory replayed every gruesome clip of gators I'd seen tearing prey apart in the blink of an eye. The terrifying power of those jaws. I shuddered, cold sweat soaking my spine. It was moving in, slow but deliberate. The tiny ripples around its snout lapped against the hull. The flimsy aluminum boat groaned under the invisible pressure. It craned its massive neck upward, its mouth opening like a cavern, preparing to deliver the killing strike to both the boat and me. The scythe had been raised. A crazy, desperate thought flashed through my mind. It was the final patchwork plan of a dying man, a hopeless gesture that was also my only sliver of light. I didn't run. I didn't grab the wrench to fight back. I slowly, carefully lowered myself down, planting both hands on the slippery deck, coming face to face with the gaping maw waiting to swallow me whole. The distance shrank so much I could smell the damp earth radiating from its nostrils. Those ancient, unblinking amber eyes drilled into me. It was sizing up its enemy, but maybe it was also confused by this bizarre lack of resistance. I took a deep breath, expanding lungs that screamed in pain from my broken ribs, and then I called out. A strange name, sounding lost in the thick fog. A name I had given it 15 years ago in a moment of foolish weakness. Lucky. My voice was hoarse, shattered, but I fought to hold on to my last shred of calm. Is that you, Lucky? The Bayou King paused. Its jaws remained wide open, but its movement slowed just a fraction. I know you remember, Lucky, I whispered, not daring to break eye contact with that terrifying gaze. Do you remember me? Then I did something anyone else would call sheer, absolute madness. I extended my right arm, covered in scars from years of clearing traps, slowly, so slowly, over the side of the boat. My fingers, straight and trembling, pointed down toward the freezing water, inches away from the jaws of death. I began to tap my index and middle fingers against the black water. Tap. A small ripple spread out. A tiny sound, almost swallowed by the silence of the swamp. Tap. Tap. A steady, slow rhythm, repeating over and over. Come here, Lucky. I'm not going to hurt you, I whispered, my voice a desperate plea, just as much to reassure myself. This was the sound a 20-year-old poacher had used to soothe a panicked baby gator while prying open the iron trap mangling its tail. A familiar rhythm to acclimate it to human presence before a cruel blade severed the final cable. I kept tapping, sweat pouring down my forehead in streams. Tap, tap, tap. The Bayou King stopped swimming entirely. It floated like a massive log right alongside the boat. The cavernous mouth slowly closed. It never took its eyes off my tapping hand. Unlike the cold, deadly demeanor from moments ago, something seemed to stir in its eyes. Confusion, scrutiny. The insane ritual of a desperate man trying to hack through millions of years of reptilian evolution. Could an ancient creature, designed by nature purely to hunt and survive, retain a vague memory of a tiny act of mercy? Or would the ruthless instinct of the bayou conquer all? The soft splashing continued steadily. Tap, tap, tap. Silence enveloped us, pulled as tight as a snapping wire. A wordless war was raging between instinct and memory, between the past and the present. And then, the 20-foot monster slowly, sullenly lowered its massive head and sank into the thick black water. It left behind a terrifying void, and I knew its decision would be my final verdict. The water was smooth as glass, freezing, deadly. My hand hovered in the air, muddy droplets falling from my fingertips. Drip, drip. I slowly pulled my arm back, clutching my aching ribs. It was right underneath me. Anyone familiar with the Gulf knows the gator's basic hunting tactic. Dive deep, turn invisible in the murky water, and launch a fatal ambush from below to knock prey out of safety. I squeezed my eyes shut, clenched my jaw, and gripped the crossbar until my hands bled. I braced myself for the sound of tearing aluminum and the sensation of saw-like jaws crushing bone and flesh. This is it, Jake, I told myself, my chest heaving with what I thought were my final desperate breaths. 1 second, 2 seconds. The silent waiting was worse torture than 1,000 knife cuts. And then, a physical force transferred through the floorboards. I flinched hard, but strangely, it wasn't a violent ram meant to capsize everything like before. No sound of buckling or crunching metal. It was a heavy, solid pressure, a massive weight slowly pressing against the flat transom of the boat, right next to the dead outboard. The aluminum hull shivered slightly, and then it slid across the water. I snapped my eyes open, stunned. The thick fog on either side of the hull was peeling backward. A light breeze brushed through my sweat-soaked hair. The speed was a slow crawl, but incredibly steady. There was no whining engine, just the eerily smooth sound of water parting. My heart hammering in my throat, I twisted my body, slowly, ever so slowly, turning my head to look off the back of the boat. Under the dim light of the crescent moon, a sight unfolded that I won't forget until they put me in the ground. The Bayou King's massive, armored snout was pressed flat against the flimsy aluminum transom. The muscular top half of its body crested the surface, while its long tail, bearing that bone-white V-shaped scar, swished rhythmically, churning powerful vortexes in the deep water. It wasn't biting. It wasn't flipping the boat. It was pushing. The Bayou King was using its massive 20-foot frame, packed with the power of a primal killing machine, to push this rickety boat through the dead water, aiming straight for the nearest strip of land faintly silhouetted on the horizon. The very concept of absurdity, the absolute boundary between predator and prey, completely shattered in my mind. The extreme tension snapped like an over-torqued cable. I let my arms drop, sliding down to the waterlogged floor deck, leaning my back against the hull. The solid shoulders of a man who had stared down death, who had once treated life like garbage, began to tremble violently. I buried my weathered, calloused face in my hands, and for the first time in 15 years of agonizing guilt, I cried. Choked sobs tore out of me into the silent bayou. Hot, salty tears poured through my fingers, mixing with the foul swamp water still clinging to my face. It remembered. Amidst thousands of memories built on brutal survival and bloody slaughter in this unforgiving swamp, that primal monster had carefully preserved one tiny memory of mercy. Nature never forgets a single thing. And tonight, the blood debt from 15 years ago was officially paid in full, in a way no human mind could have ever conjured. The first sound to pull me out of shock was the squelch of mud. The bow of the rickety aluminum boat slid up onto the muddy bank, shuddered once, and sat still. I looked up, my breathing still ragged. In front of me was solid, safe ground, a border separating me from the abyss of dead water behind me. I used my shaking hands to grip the gunwale, struggling to my feet, and stumbled onto the thick mud. The second my boots hit solid earth, my knees gave out. I collapsed, planting my hands on my thighs, gasping for air, unable to believe I was still breathing. A soft ripple of water behind me made me whip around. The Bayou King had backed away. Under the full moon, its massive 20-foot body surfaced halfway, looking like a statue carved from the prehistoric era. No menace, no aggression. Those ancient, cold amber eyes looked straight at me one final time. The gaze was long and profound, holding a silent acknowledgement between two creatures whose lifelines had intersected in the most brutal and most miraculous of ways. Then, without a sound, like a phantom of the marsh, the Bayou King slowly lowered its massive head. The black water swallowed it whole, leaving only faint ripples fading into the distance before it vanished completely into the silent Louisiana night. Months later. "Never underestimate them," I said, my voice ringing clear in the crisp morning air. The warm morning sun pierced through the ancient cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, casting glittering streaks of light onto the glassy surface of the bayou. Surrounding me was a group of young biology interns, notebooks out, eyes wide and listening intently. I pointed out toward the deep water, where patches of water hyacinth bobbed bright green. Their reptilian brains might be small, but their memories run as deep as this swamp. They don't just remember terrain, prey, or enemies. They remember scents, sounds, and sometimes they remember how we treat them. I paused, taking a deep breath of that familiar, muddy air. A strange sense of profound peace settled in my chest. The sheer terror of that night was gone, replaced by an absolute, profound respect. "We aren't the masters of this land," I continued, looking at each of their young faces. "We're just passing through, and how we treat the hosts will determine how they treat us when we need them most." Late afternoon fell, painting the delta in fiery reds. The interns had headed back to the research station. I backed up my familiar aluminum boat and fired up the engine. The roar tore through the silence, but this time it didn't sound jarring. I navigated down a narrow, familiar slough, pushing deep into the heart of the King's territory. Cutting the engine, I let the boat drift toward a flat rock jutting out of the bank, hidden beneath a thick canopy of trees. I brought no guns, no traps. I only brought a large plastic bucket. I stepped to the edge of the boat, reached in bare-handed, and hauled out a massive, heavy slab of fresh, bloody pork, placing it carefully on the flat rock. I didn't call its name. I didn't try to act familiar. I just stood there for a second, gave a slight nod toward the dark water ahead as a gesture of ultimate respect, then turned my back, returned to the helm, cranked the engine, and slowly idled away. The camera doesn't follow me. It stays behind, silent, keeping a wide shot of the rock and the glassy water. 5 minutes pass. 10 minutes pass. Darkness begins to drape over the swamp. And then, from the abyssal depths, without a single sound, a massive dark shadow slowly surfaces. Amber eyes gleam in the fading twilight. The Bayou King opens its terrifying jaws, snatches the slab of meat in one smooth motion, and slowly sinks back down. With a powerful sweep of a tail marked by a bone-white V-shaped scar, it cuts through the water and is gone. People always say that a guilty past will find its way back to haunt you, like a shadow you can't shake. But that night, staring death in the face, it wasn't the cruelty of the swamp that dragged Jake under. It was a tiny act of redemption from his past that saved him. Because in this harsh, wild world, where survival instinct is the supreme law, nothing is ever truly forgotten. Especially a promise, permanently carved as a scar. The story of Jake and the Bayou King is proof that sometimes the smallest act of mercy can create the greatest miracles in the wild. If you believe in the power of redemption and the incredible bond between humanity and nature, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next extraordinary animal rescue story. And don't forget to drop a comment below. If you were in Jake's shoes that night, what would you have done? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next adventure.